So this is the highly anticipated 3rd generation Hammerhead Karoo bike computer, and this takes the long-standing and quite popular Karoo 2 and makes a lot of refinements all around, like being lighter. It's also more accurate with a dual-band satellite chipset, it has longer battery life, and now also has a companion app for your smartphone, which makes things just much more convenient all around. So this new Hammerhead Karoo has been in the works for about the last 2 years since SRAM bought Hammerhead back a couple of years ago, and they've listened to a lot of the feedback from the Karoo 2. They definitely addressed most of the issues that kept the Karoo 2 as a really good bike computer, but not necessarily the best that you could get either. And I have to say that I'm pretty impressed with this new Karoo so far. Now, as you probably have kind of noticed by now, I've been calling it the new Karoo and not the Karoo 3 or Karoo Gen 3 or anything like that. So for some reason, Hammerhead and or SRAM aren't calling it the Karoo 3, but between you and me, it really is the 3rd Karoo. Okay, so with that, let's go ahead and get into what this new Karoo is all about. So first off, it runs $475, which is up from the $399 of the Karoo 2. So this definitely sits at the kind of upper end of the premium bike computer market. So let's talk about if it's actually worth it. So inside the box, you get the new Karoo itself, an out front mount, which is slightly different than before. There's also a Garmin quarter-turn adapter mount. There's a USB-C to USB-C cable, which is an incredibly high-quality cable, just like the previous version. And then there's also a lanyard along with some manuals and stuff like that. So from a hardware standpoint, there's some really welcome changes here. So first off, it has a slightly different shape where they've actually inverted the shape so it's more streamlined than the Karoo 2 and maybe less like hammerheady or something like that. In addition, it's also lighter, being around 12 to 13 grams less or about 10% lighter than the previous version. And then on the back of the device, so this is going to look different for all you out there who are familiar with the Karoo 2. So the new Karoo doesn't have a slot for a SIM card like before, but instead there's now a new companion app that takes care of a lot of that connectivity. And more details on that here in just one bit. And for the display, so this has a 3.2-inch display just like the previous version, and this display is seriously one of the best that you can get when it comes to pixel density as well as colors, where there's just tons of contrast, the colors are super saturated and they just pop. It's basically just like your smartphone, and that should probably come as no surprise since the new Karoo does run off of Android just like the previous version. Now, one complaint I always had about the Karoo 2 though is the anti-glare finish that they had on there, and it was kind of hard to see in direct sunlight where it looked kind of washed out, and what I have to do is kind of crank up the brightness to full brightness for me to see it clearly. But with this new Karoo, there's a new cover glass here that uses Corning Gorilla Glass, which is more of a glossy finish, but even though it's glossy, you don't really get that many reflections either. But either way, this new finish is so much better, and it's just a huge improvement from the previous version where I can see the display in all sorts of conditions, whether it's sunny or cloudy. And I also found that I didn't actually need to crank up the brightness to full brightness to see it clearly. With most of my testing, I had it at like 50% brightness or less, and it was super easy to see. Another change of the hardware are the buttons. So the buttons are now spaced farther apart so they're easier to distinguish, and there's also more room for your fingers, so when you're removing it from the mount, it's less likely to accidentally press a button. And yes, it does use the same style mounting system, but there are some updates to it which we'll talk about here in just one bit. The buttons themselves are also bigger and more pronounced with more defined edges, and there's also lots of texture on these, so you'll know when you're actually on the button, even with gloves on. And again, quite the improvement over the Karoo 2, which was almost too smooth on the edge of the buttons. The buttons also have a different feel to them where they're more positive than before, so you know you're actually pressing on them, where they almost have an audible click. And then one more new thing in regards to the buttons is that there's a new power button on the bottom that also doubles as a way to toggle on and off the display while you're in use if you wanted to save on battery. And then one more change at the bottom, and again, this came from feedback for sure, is that the USB-C port now has a built-in cover, so no need for those little plugs like on the previous version to keep that USB-C port free of water. Oh, and while we're talking about water, the new Karoo has the same IP67 water resistance rating as the previous version. The new Karoo also has an updated processor as well as more memory, so it's supposed to be faster and more responsive than the Karoo 2, where it has a quad-core 2 GHz CPU with 4 GB of RAM, essentially double that of the previous version. And moving around the device does feel a bit faster for my testing, where things definitely feel snappier overall, and that does include accessing the drawer by swiping down from the top, which seemed to kind of always take a while with the previous version. The one area that doesn't seem to be all that much faster though is the startup time, where that still takes just kind of a while to start up. So I definitely wish that was a little bit faster. Oh, and then one more thing is that they've also doubled the amount of memory from 32 GB to 64 GB, so there's more space for maps. And this new Karoo also has a crazy loud speaker. I mean, this thing is like shockingly loud, but you'll easily be able to hear turn notifications, approaching traffic if you're using a radar, training milestones, battery warnings, as well as notifications. Now, when it comes to the mount, well, they are still using the same mounting system as before, where you kind of just slide on the Karoo like this to get it on there, and then you'll twist, and then slide out to get it off. And I haven't necessarily found that to be the most intuitive system, but at least with the new button placement on the Karoo itself, there's less of a chance of accidentally pressing a button when you go to remove it. The mount itself is actually updated though, where first off, it has a stronger arm. Again, something that was kind of an issue with the Karoo 2 for some of you out there, but they also went ahead and added a way for you to adjust the fore and aft position of the Karoo based on your preference, as well as having an accessory adapter on the bottom that you can purchase for an action camera. And this new mount, by the way, is totally backwards compatible, so you can totally use it with your Karoo 2 if you'd like. And if you don't like to use this sort of mounting system, they do include a Garmin quarter turn adapter if you happen to use edge mounts. And I think that's just really fantastic that they include this adapter. And when it comes to battery life, so this is another area where they made some improvements with the new Karoo, having a claimed 15 plus hours of battery life, so about a 30% increase. And this was achieved with both a bigger battery as well as being more efficient when it comes to the processor internals. Now, for how this actually plays out in the real world though, so on these rides here, I had a heart rate monitor as well as a power meter paired via Ant Plus, and I had the Karoo around 50% brightness with the auto brightness enabled. And after an hour and 45-minute ride, it used about 7.43% per hour, which comes to about 13.46 hours, so pretty close to that 15-hour claim. Now, one thing that can affect battery life though is if you're using navigation with the route. So on this ride, I loaded in a route and I had it on the map page for maybe like half of the ride. And this is where I was using about 9.33% per hour, which translates into almost 11 hours of battery life. And then when you do need to go ahead and recharge it, it takes about 2.5 hours for a full charge from empty, but you can get a 30% charge in 30 minutes if you're in a rush. Okay, so now let's go ahead and talk about the software. And for longtime Karoo owners, you know that the software is a huge part of what makes a Karoo a Karoo. And this runs basically the same software as before, where there's just a huge amount of customization that you can have here for the data pages, where you can choose from tons of different layouts. There's basically any imaginable data field, and they promise plenty of frequent updates just like they've done with previous versions. And it is still built on top of Android, so you can definitely still sideload apps. Now, for all of you out there who may be upgrading from a Karoo 2, what is nice here too is that when you first go to set up the new Karoo, it should also just transfer over all the settings like your ride profiles, data pages, maps, as well as routes from your previous Karoo. They also said that it should transfer over all your sensor pairings, but for some reason it didn't transfer over all my sensors from my Karoo 2, but I'm not really sure if that was just because I was running pre-release software or something like that, but honestly, it was actually kind of nice to start with a clean slate since I have no idea where some of these old sensor pairings were from. Oh, and then one more thing in regards to the setup is that if you have a SRAM account, you can also use that to log in, and it should automatically sync over any bikes that you have in your SRAM Access Bike Garage with your SRAM login for all your access components. Now, there's also a new companion app for your smartphone, which solves a lot of things, including one of the weirdest things about the Karoo 2, where you actually have to connect it to Wi-Fi to upload your ride to Strava after your ride. Kind of a first world problem, I know, but it was a little bit frustrating, but all you have to do now is just have your phone with you, and the ride will upload via the app. Simple as that. But the app also does some other interesting things here too. So you can also use it for live tracking if you want to send a link to someone where they can follow along your ride. And in addition, it also offers a very convenient way of syncing routes as well as workouts to your device on the fly. Now, there is one very cool feature that it integrated with this app though. So if you're trying to find, let's say, a coffee shop or bike shop or something like that on your ride, well, the easiest way to do that is just open up Google Maps or Apple Maps on your phone. So what you can do here now is that you can use Google Maps or Apple Maps to find the location, and then you can just share that location over to the Hammerhead companion app, and that'll just automatically sync it over to your Karoo. It's really cool. Now, even though that new app performs route syncing, workout syncing, and live tracking, as well as that Google Maps, Apple Maps integration, it doesn't actually contain your ride history at the moment. You still have to log into your Hammerhead dashboard to view that data, and this is something that I kind of did mention to them that I hope gets added to the app in the future. Now, when it comes to mapping and navigation, that's really going to be one of the big highlights of Karoo bike computers, where they have fully routable worldwide maps that are cycling specific. And all the maps are free, by the way, and then you have 64 gigabytes of storage for those maps, so you should be able to load in quite a few maps on the device at once. And in regards to how these maps are cycling specific, so these are very well put together maps. So first off, the map theme that they use in terms of the colors for landmarks makes a lot of sense, and it's just easy to distinguish between roads, bodies of water, open spaces, and trails. And they also highlight trails that are specific for bikes, like the ones that are highlighted in green. So those are going to be like city paths that are designated for bikes. And then the brown ones here are going to be off-road trails. And that's another thing nice about these maps is that they contain information on the actual surface type. So this is where you can have specific routing for road, mountain bike, or gravel. Along with maps though, now we should also talk about routing. So when you're already on a ride, you'll obviously be able to see your breadcrumb trail on top of the map, but you'll also be able to route back to your start location if you'd like. And then in addition to that, you can also browse the map for a point of interest. Just go and drop a pin and it'll create a cycling specific route on the fly to get to that location. And it's also incredibly fast in regards to calculating routes on the fly, like crazy quick actually. In addition to all that though, you can also load in routes, whether that's straight from the Hammerhead dashboard where they have a pretty good routing tool, but also from third parties like Strava, Ride with GPS, Komoot, as well as Suunto. And with all these routes, you can go ahead and ride the route with the intended direction, of course, but you can also ride it in reverse with any route that you load in. And then I already mentioned this before, was that cool feature with Apple Maps or Google Maps where you can just share the location with the Hammerhead companion app and then it'll just immediately show up on the new Karoo. It's really cool. And the actual routing experience when you're riding is really top notch here, where they have very clear color coding to show when you're on the intended route, off route, or even part of a temporary route, like if you're routed to a drop pin on the map. And then the automatic rerouting that it has is also shockingly quick here in regards to how fast it can actually recalculate a route. So routing and maps really are a big highlight of the Karoo bike computers, and they've definitely improved on that with the Karoo 3. Now, when it comes to external sensors, the new Karoo can connect to nearly all the sensors, like pretty much any cycling-related external sensor that you can think of, whether they're ANT+ or Bluetooth. So we're talking heart rate sensors, power meters, smart bike trainers, Vario radar and lights, SRAM access, but unfortunately no Di2, and I'd have to guess that SRAM owning Hammerhead now makes that situation a little bit sticky. But there is also compatibility with SRAM's new red group set with their bonus buttons as well as access blips, where you can assign specific software functions to those buttons like recording a lap, pausing or resuming your ride, basically any action that you can do with a computer. And just like previous Karoos, the new Karoo has their climber feature where it's able to automatically detect climbs based on your predicted path. So what it does is that it utilizes the elevation data that's contained in their base maps on the device to predict where you're going. And if it notices that you're about to approach a climb, there's a special pop-up that shows a chart of the climb that's coming up with insights on gradients. And this is just an incredibly useful tool to visualize just how much suffering that's left in your climb. It's seriously a great feature. And more recently, Garmin and Wahoo have also added similar kinds of features. Now, when it comes to GPS accuracy, so the new Karoo has a new multi-band GNSS chipset, and this is basically what all higher-end devices are getting nowadays, where they can access numerous satellite frequencies at one time, which can lead to better accuracy in areas where satellite signals can kind of bounce off of objects like tall buildings, canyon walls, as well as heavy tree cover. And the new Karoo has definitely been a solid performer here. So like on this ride, good to go in regards to the total distance between all the devices, and then the finer detail of the GPS tracks also looks solid as well. Now, for how it compares to the Karoo 2 though, so like on this right here, good stuff again in regards to the total distance between all the devices, and the elevation gain also was in line for the Karoo 3 compared to the corrected elevation figure in Strava, which is based off of their base maps. The Karoo 2, however, was a bit higher, which is something that I've kind of always encountered with that unit, but for the new Karoo, that seems to be solved. And for the finer detail of the GPS tracks, the new Karoo looked good over the course of the entire ride as well. And there was certainly a clear difference in terms of accuracy when comparing it to the Karoo 2, where the Karoo 2 was just kind of off doing its own thing at times. There's also a noticeable difference when it comes to the corners and curves, where the new Karoo, or Karoo 3, was more precise, where the Karoo 2 sometimes overshot or sometimes undercut some corners. So the new Karoo has definitely addressed a lot of the issues that we encountered with the Karoo 2 in many areas. Karoo bike computers have always had fantastic software with tons of customization, innovative features, as well as a very good user interface, but it was always kind of held back with some aspects of the hardware like the weight, the readability of the display, as well as the battery life. But now this new Karoo is definitely a contender when it comes to one of the best bike computers out there. I really only have two small complaints. The first is that it's still using the same mounting system, which I just don't find to be terribly intuitive, but hey, they do include a Garmin quarter turn mount, which is awesome. But the other complaint, and I know this may sound a little bit weird, is that they want to just call it the new Karoo and not the Karoo 3, which is really what this is. So this new Karoo is a really good bike computer, but the question is, how does it compare to the likes of like a Garmin Edge 840, 1040, as well as the Wahoo Element? Well, I've definitely got some follow-up videos in the works on exactly those comparisons, so make sure to subscribe to get a notification when those videos drop. In the meantime, happy riding, and we will see you in the next video.